Hello, this is Professor Alison Lew with Public Health 100 Human Nutrition, Wellness, and Safety. This is Lecture B about the human body. I want to reference our textbook. This is a link to the textbook in the human body chapter. Let's talk for a moment about the organization of the body. This is an illustration of the different levels of organization of the body, starting from the atomic level all the way up to the whole organism level. We have the molecules, the macromolecules, the organelles, the cells, the tissues, the organs, and the organ systems. So this is the smallest up to the entire organism. So it's showing basically all the different levels of organization, and all of these levels of organization have to have fuel. They have to have energy to live. And so we're going to fuel our body with food that we take in that forms energy. All of these systems also need certain nutrients to do their job. And so when we are taking in nutrients, we are making sure that we have all the essential nutrients for the body to do all of its functions. So this is just another reminder of the cellular level. These are the organelles of the cell. The cells form tissues and organs, and eventually we have the organ systems. So we have several different organ systems, and we're going to go through them really quickly. You may have had these before. This is just a review. The cardiovascular system is the heart, blood, lymph vessels, and the blood itself and the lymph, and that transports nutrients and waste products. We have the digestive system, which includes the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, and the intestines, and those are involved in digestion and absorption. We have the endocrine system, which includes all of the glands. Examples are the thyroid and the pancreas, and those produce and release hormones. We have the lymphatic system, which includes the tonsils, the adenoids, the spleen, and the thymus, and that's a one-way system of vessels that transports lymph throughout the body. Then we have the immune system, and that includes the white blood cells, the lymphatic tissue, and the marrow, and they defend against foreign invaders such as bacteria and viruses. Then we have the skin, nails, hair, sweat glands, and those form protection for the body and help keep the body warm at the perfect body temperature. We have the muscular system, which includes the skeletal, smooth, and cardiac muscle. Those are involved in body movements. And also the heart, for example, is always beating, and it is a cardiac muscle. And so those are a major function of the body that involves a muscle. We have the nervous system that includes the brain, the spinal cord, and the nerves, and they interpret and respond to stimuli. We have the reproductive system that includes the gonads and the genitals, and that includes the reproductive function and the sexual characteristics. We have the respiratory system, which includes the lungs, the nose, the mouth, the throat, and the trachea, and that involves gas exchange so we can breathe. Then we have the skeletal system, which includes the bones, the tendons, the ligaments, and the joints, and that involves our structure and function of our body. Then we have the urinary system. The excretory system is another name, and that includes the kidneys, the bladder, and the ureters, and those include the waste excretion water balance for forming our urine and eliminating that. So let's just go back here to our textbook, and I'm going to show you that each of the body systems are actually explained in some detail. There's an illustration of the whole body. Got some exercises here which are useful. And here we have a review of the structure of the cell. Also useful. More exercises. Here we have the digestive system, which we're going to go over in detail in just a moment. And each of these sections covers a different system. So if you want to work in healthcare, if you're a coach or you're going to be a coach, if maybe you're going to be a teacher, if you just care about health, you plan to, help other people in your family and your community by assisting them with anything about their health, I would encourage you to spend some time with this chapter and reviewing and or learning about the different systems. We're mostly going to focus on the digestive system in this class because it's what's so important for nutritional understanding, but all of the systems really are working together. And so to understand the systems, You have to understand their interaction, so I want to encourage you to review this material. Most of the questions on the assignment and the exam, they're going to be about the digestive system or about the indicators of health that we're about to go over, but that doesn't mean that this other material is not important, and I want to direct your attention to it. There you got all the bones. You can learn what all the bones are if you want. I'm not going to test you on it, but it's great information to know. All right, so let's go back to our lecture slides. Textbook is really a good summary. It's not so detailed that it's tedious, but it's got good information that I think you would benefit from. If you know what's in the textbook also, there's endless information available online to go even deeper so that your understanding can get even better. All right, so the digestive system. I want you to think of the human digestive system as a long tube that's made up of organs through which food passes for processing, and processing in this case is called digestion. This long tube also has organs along the way that contribute to digestion but are not actually part of the tube itself. So can you tell which organs are part of the tube and which are adjacent to it but not contributing, that are contributing to digestion but not like part of the tube? Are you able to tell? Let's look. So we have the esophagus, we have the stomach, we have the small intestine and the large intestine going down to the anus, and that's the tube itself. Then we have other organs along the way, such as the gallbladder and the pancreas, that are contributing, but they're not actually part of that tube. So I want you to remember this next statement. Digestion begins in the mouth when salivary amylase begins breaking down large starch molecules. Most people don't think about that, but that's where digestion begins. Um, so the salivary amylase, you may have had experience with it because when you eat something like a cracker, something that has a lot of starch, then you may have experienced what happens with the salivary amylase. As you chew and mix that saliva in with the cracker starts to taste sweeter. And the reason it starts to taste sweeter is because those large starch molecules are breaking down and you can actually taste a more sweet taste. Have you ever wondered how a bolus of food actually moves down the digestive system? And a bolus is what the food we're about to swallow is called. So when we do swallowing tests at the hospital and we talk about the bolus and did the bolus go down the esophagus correctly? Was there any aspiration? When we're talking about that test, we talk about the bolus. So that's what it's called. The process that helps it move down the esophagus is called peristalsis. So let's talk about what peristalsis is. There are rhythmic contractions that propel food down the esophagus. And peristalsis also exists in other parts of the digestive system. So it's not just in this one place, but we're going to talk about how it works in the esophagus. There are circular muscles that contract, pushing down the bolus, okay? And the bolus is that circle. Then there are longitudinal muscles that contract, shortening the pathway for the bolus. And then the bolus reaches the stomach from the wave of peristaltic contractions, causing the sphincter to relax. A sphincter is like you can think of it like a donut of muscle, and so it has to relax to allow the bolus to enter the stomach. And so that will happen at the very end, this process for the esophagus. So once the bolus gets into the stomach is a very muscular organ and it has powerful peristaltic contractions. The stomach mashes and pulverizes and churns the food into what is called chyme. And the chyme is then mixed together with gastric juices, which are secreted by stomach cells. And the gastric juices contain a strong acid called hydrochloric acid and an enzyme called pepsin. And the pepsin helps to chemically break down food. So the small intestine is where the juices from the gallbladder and the pancreas are mixed with the chyme. These juices aid in the digestion of the food. And then we have the large intestine, and that is where the indigestible parts of the food and the gut bacteria form feces. The gut bacteria actually make up about half of the feces, and the feces are held in the rectum until they are eliminated from the body via the anus during defecation. And let's just go back for a moment to our illustration of the entire system and talk about parts of the system that we didn't talk about when we first started this discussion. I want to talk about that the large intestine actually has this gut bacteria, okay? So the gut bacteria are actually really, really important to our digestive system and our health. We're learning more every day about how important the gut bacteria are to our health, and not just of our digestive system, but our overall health. Those gut bacteria are considered good bacteria. They're supposed to be there, and they help us digest food. If it weren't for the gut bacteria, there's things that we couldn't digest and absorb very, very well at all. Also want to talk for a moment about the salivary gland. Salivary glands are up here, and they secrete saliva into the mouth. And I want to talk about the pharynx, which is involved in swallowing the chewed food that has the saliva in it, called the bolus. Also, we didn't mention the liver before. The liver makes bile, which aids in digestion and absorption of fat. So it's very important for us to get those fats from our food, and we do need those. We talked about the pancreas and gallbladder, and we talked about the small intestine, large intestine, and then the anus is how we eliminate waste. So that's a good overview of our digestive system. So let's do a challenge question for a moment. The challenge question is, the stomach contains concentrated hydrochloric acid. So why doesn't the stomach digest itself? The stomach is made mostly of protein, so the hydrochloric acid could break that down really quickly. But it doesn't happen. Why is that? So the answer is, the main reason, is the stomach is lined with epithelial cells that secrete mucus. The epithelial cells do turn over pretty quickly. They don't last very long. They don't live very long. But the mucus provides protection from the acid also. So the system won't allow that to happen because of these protections that are in place. Now, you could say that a stomach ulcer is really like the stomach digesting itself in a small area, and that's kind of true. But a stomach ulcer is happening when there's some kind of breakdown in the usual system. So it's kind of a disorder of sorts, not the way the system is supposed to function on a regular basis. The way the system is supposed to function on a regular basis, the digestion of the stomach by the hydrochloric acid is prevented. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about the indications for nutritional health. So sometimes we need to figure out whether someone is nutritionally healthy. And there's different clinicians that might do this. One is a registered dietitian, which is an expert in clinical nutrition. A physician might do it, a physician's assistant, a nurse practitioner, who are provider level professionals. And then we have nurses and many other professionals who have an interest in whether or not the patient is nutritionally healthy. So how would we find that out? We also use this in research. So the indicators of nutritional health section of your book is very important, and it's linked here. So to begin this discussion, let's talk about body composition. The body is made up of mostly water. It's about 62% water. Then there's fat, which forms about 16%, protein, which forms about 16%, and other, which forms about 6%, and that's minerals, carbohydrates, and other substances. So when we're talking about measuring someone's nutritional health, one of the first things we think about is the body mass index, or BMI. So all of these measures of nutritional health have strengths and weaknesses, and the BMI does too. But it is a good indicator, it's fast, and it's used in most clinical settings. So many times in an electronic medical record, there will be a BMI calculator. So as soon as the clinician enters the weight and the height, a BMI will be calculated. And that's useful to medical providers and others who are working with the patients to figure out how they can use that information to help the person take better care of themselves, to evaluate their nutritional status, to evaluate their health status, to help decrease their risks or evaluate their risk of certain problems. So you can use a BMI calculator online to do the same thing. This is the CDC BMI calculator. So if I were to enter 5 feet, 3 inches, and 140 pounds, and to calculate the BMI, I can find out that that's a healthy weight for this individual, 24.8. Okay. Now you can also use metric. Some of you are used to using metric all the time. Oops. So that's how you do the metric. It asks you in centimeters and kilograms, and you'll get the same thing. So there's many BMI calculators. So what does the BMI actually mean? Well, we had an example there where it showed what the BMI was for our example, but an underweight BMI is considered below 18.5. You definitely don't want to be underweight for your BMI because that's not a healthy weight. And people do have health consequences from being underweight. It's neither healthy to be underweight nor overweight or obese. So ideally, you're in the normal rate range, but that can be hard to achieve sometimes. The normal rate range is 18.5 to 24.9. And then the overweight range is 25 to 29.9, and the obese range is 30 or higher. So let's go to our textbook and do a little exercise about how to calculate BMI. Going to just do it on a calculator. So we have Malia here. Her height is 5'7", and she's 141 pounds. So what would her BMI be? So at 141 and 5'7", we're going to do 141 times 703 to get 99,123. And then we're going to use her height was 5'7", so 5 feet is 60 inches, plus 7 more is 67 times 67, which is 4,489. $22.1. So we go back to Malia. All right, so her BMI is 22.1. That is one of the answers here. And that puts her in the normal category. So that's how we calculate a BMI using a calculator. So there are some weaknesses to the BMI. It's super useful, very easy to do. There's a lot of information out there about risk of a BMI being this or that. But the BMI does not distinguish between excess fat, muscle, or bone mass. Now, most of the time, if someone's BMI is high, the issue is excess fat. But there are occasions when that is not the case. And what does that mean clinically? Well, that means that someone like this fellow who has a lot of muscle mass may have a problem with the BMI being a good indicator of his nutritional health. If someone is very muscular, they may have a very high BMI, even though they do not have the risk usually associated with a high BMI that have to do with more fat than they should have. The reason for this is that muscle weighs more than fat. So his weight is going to be higher because he has all this muscle than it would be if the increase in weight was due to fat. So that can be a weakness. And so it can be hard to know from just looking at the numbers whether or not a BMI indicates a problem with excess fat, a problem with excess muscle. So that's a weakness. And sometimes we use BMI for things like, okay, the person's BMI shouldn't be above this to have this or that procedure. And, that can be false, a false idea. And we want to make sure that in medicine, we're always looking at reality of patient risks. Because if we say, oh, the patient would be too high risk to do this if their BMI was above, 32, then um, we might be indicating that perhaps the patient shouldn't have a procedure that they actually would be in their best interest to go ahead and have. And so we always want to look at the individual and make sure we're considering the individual when we are making assessments. And so an individual that's very muscular, like if I was doing documentation about someone and I calculated their BMI as part of their assessment and I noted that they looked like this man and they had a lot of muscle mass, I would probably say that. I would probably say, he's a football player, has a lot of muscle mass in my little documentation section so that any clinicians that looked at that would understand that that was the case. I know that an RD would do that and that, many physicians and nurse practitioners and PAs might do that as well because it's just important to note. All right, so body fat content. There are several ways to measure body fat content. This is how you do figure out what the fat content is, right? We just said BMI can't tell you much about the fat because it doesn't show you, I shouldn't say it doesn't show you much about fat. What it does is it doesn't tell you where that weight is coming from. It doesn't tell you whether it's coming from excess fat if it's too high. It doesn't tell you whether it's muscle. This can tell you about the body fat content. Um, and, of course, we need body fat. Body fat is essential to our health because it performs many functions. It helps us store energy. It keeps us warm. There's important things about body fat, but we want to be able to measure how much we have. And so to do that, you can do the skin fold test, which is probably the least expensive and easy to do. You could do the dual energy X-ray absorptiometry test, which is also called DEXA, or you could do the underwater weighing test, which would involve needing a pool to do that because it's underwater, and the bioelectric impedance analysis, or BIA. Now, in clinical settings, I have only seen the skin fold test done and then DEXA. Um, I think that underwater weighing is more often used in research settings and probably BIA as well. DEXA is actually a device that's used to measure whether people have bone mass that's adequate for osteoporosis. So DEXA scanners are around in the clinical settings to test for osteoporosis, but they are usually used to test for osteoporosis and not to test for body fat content. However, you could use it to test for body fat content. The most commonly done is the skin fold test, but honestly, in offices and clinics, not much skin fold testing is taking place. Now, you may see it done when there's a specific nutritional assessment done, like by a dietitian or someone else. So, what's the optimal fat content for men and women? It is different. Women need 20 to 30%. Biologically, women need more fat, and the reason for that is childbearing. It's important for childbearing to have that fat content. And for men, you want 12 to 20, and the fat content can also vary by age and physical activity. All right, so let's talk about fat distribution for a moment because it's not all about fat content, it's not all about BMI, We can also tell someone's risk factors regarding their health by their fat distribution. So the apple shape is associated with an increased risk of heart and vascular disease, and these are the number one killers of Americans. So the apple can be thought of as kind of more around the middle, okay? Thicker around the middle, less of a waist there, right? And that's called upper body obesity when someone is obese, or the android apple shape. So this one is associated with more issues with heart and vascular. This one, the pear-shaped, is associated with lower risk of vascular disease and heart disease. Now, men or women can have either of these. There are more women that have the pear shape, but there are definitely women who have the apple shape, and there are men who have the pear shape. So bear that in mind. But this is one of the reasons that women have lower rates of heart and vascular disease at younger ages, because they keep a pear shape more often and for most of their lives when they have it. And so that's really the last slide. And if you have any questions, please let me know. Don't forget your syllabus. Please keep an eye on that. Make sure that you are doing all the assignments for this week, including the questions for Lecture A, the discussion forum question, interactive assignment if you're an online student, and then the questions for Lecture B. Make sure all those are done by Sunday at 11:30 so that you'll get credit for all your assignments. If you are an in-person student, hopefully you attended the in-person session. If you did not, for some reason, please contact me and discuss options, but understand that you are expected to be at those in-person sessions to get your credit for that assignment. Thanks so much. Bye bye.